Hello, and welcome to the SharePoint Framework and JavaScript Special Interest Group Biweekly Sync. It is October 24th, 2019. Thank you all for joining us here today. Got a great agenda as usual for everybody. Our latest updates on SharePoint Framework, as well as updates across the Patterns and Practices program offerings, and then demos. We got our first demo from Prasad Meenavalli, who's got a site header toggler SPFx extension, and then we've got another demo from Andrew Connell, which is Azure DevOps pipelines. We could have had a PnP JS demo, but everybody voted to have Andrew's demo, so it's going to be really spectacular. So opportunities to participate in PnP Patterns and Practices all up, and this SIG in particular. We always encourage everybody to reach out with demos. I think the demos continue to be one of the best parts of these calls, just to see all the great stuff everybody out there in the community is working on. So that could be something around SharePoint Framework, whether you've got a web part, application customizer, you're doing something around provisioning, really anything in that space. And of course, if it includes something from the @PnP set of offerings, that makes it even a little bit better on this call. And then just a reminder, we of course encourage everyone to contribute on GitHub to all of our projects. So that includes reporting issues, submitting pull requests, and then as well, if you see a question that you might know the answer to, take a few minutes, or if you can take a few minutes and respond to that question. That's always a big help and gets folks an answer perhaps a little bit faster than waiting for somebody on the core team to get to that. And all the projects absolutely welcome folks contributing code and issues and ideas to those projects. So please do reach out there. And then finally, providing feedback. How are these calls going? How are generally all our work going? What kind of documentation needs are there? And where can we help out a little bit more? And of course, positive feedback is okay too. A lot of this work is done kind of in a vacuum. So it's good to hear what is working well so that we can do more of that, or kind of bring that a little bit more to the fore. And before we get to the SharePoint Framework updates, one last thing, we've got our links there. So aka MS SPDev-docs will take you to the all-up SharePoint developer documentation. SPDev-videos will take you to our YouTube channel, where you can find the recordings for this special interest group, as well as the other special interest group, and lots of other neat stuff. So tutorials, both long and short, in there on various topics. There's different series of tutorials that go together, for example, on provisioning. So you can find a lot of great resources there for learning all about SharePoint development, different techniques, different strategies, and as well as catching up on our various calls, because as well the monthly calls are on there as well. And then Vesa and Waldeck have their weekly series that's on there as well. So definitely check all that out if you need a little bit more SharePoint content in your life. And then finally, SPDev-issues is an issues list to report anything with SharePoint product. So you can check that out and report your issues, see if issues you might be having have already been reported, and so forth. So definitely check out all of those resources to help with your SharePoint development work. And moving on to SharePoint Framework update, Vesa.
Excellent. Just to pinpoint that one, what you said around the dev issues, it is for dev issues, dev issues. We can't unfortunately process any non-dev issues using the issue list. Just the updated statistics. I didn't want to add nothing too dramatic here. We did see this massive leap forward during this autumn, so on the September-October timeframe, and now it's slightly slowing down. But again, it is too early to say what will happen next week and what is the curve on that one. The curve looked insane on the growth usage starting from the end of August. As you can see, there was a small slowness on summertime, and then nice jump on there. Basically, these just if you're wondering what these are and why we're not actually giving you again the exact detailed numbers, this is we have a pretty interesting way of calculating actual usage of third-party extensibility in SharePoint Online. So giving you the number, if it's like 5 million people in a day are doing something, it doesn't actually give you the usage, because there's a big difference. Is the user using one application once a day, or is it using the one application 10 times of a day, or 10 different applications 20 times in a day? So it's not just about the number of users, it's also about the actual usage of those applications, and that's what we're creating within these charts. Just an update on the roadmap things. So the next things what are coming out. So we have been quite silent on releasing things, and that's mainly because we now prioritize what's coming and announced in Ignite. So within 2 weeks in Ignite, we do have an Ignite special scheduled for the 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks from now will be an Ignite special related on updates on the SharePoint dev side. And what we'll kind of actually release there is let's say an SPFx v2 or updates and so on, or we can announce that. So there will be a logical, let's say, next steps on this journey of extending SharePoint framework not to be anymore just SharePoint framework. Now, that's basically what's going to happen in Ignite. I'm not going to tell that precisely, but you can read between the lines. We've been talking about these things for quite a few times. As an example, you can build Office add-ins with SharePoint framework. That is coming up pretty soon. We should demo that in the build timeframe, and then we're now kind of getting that one out to preview usage. So basically our intention, and that's why we've been prioritizing our time on this one, is that you can build any Microsoft 365 extensibilities using then SharePoint framework or similar kind of a pattern. And then there will be other announcements. We've been pretty open on talking about the fact that there will be a fluid framework capability coming out. We demoed that in build. That is coming up to preview at sooner or later, and that's kind of relates on this bigger picture as well. But that's pretty much what's happening here. For the existing SharePoint framework, obviously, the day-to-day SharePoint framework, which we build stuff and we use on a day-to-day basis, there's no dramatic changes on that one. We will make this transition pretty seamless, and there will be 1.10 sooner or later coming out. It is slightly resource constrained right now because we're prioritizing the Ignite announcements and all of that stuff on these things, which is a pity, but it's always the challenge with these things. Really the new capabilities, which we are, well, at least one of these is coming out still in October, it is 24th of October. There will be the pre-allocation of extension sizes on page rendering. This is actually already visible partly in the tenants. We talked about this one a few times already in the community call. This is actually already visible in the tenant-wide extensions list in the, I think, 99% of the tenants. We will document this capability pretty soon, and we can actually start using that as part of the extension. So basic idea is that you can pre-allocate that I'm going to have in the header section 50 pixel height header, and that will then mean that it will first write or render an empty div there, but then it will render the functionality inside of it. The main objective of this one is to avoid the screen flickering so that the screen is kept on moving as part of the loading events, which you probably have seen with the application customizers in your implementation. But that's basically already working, and it's now a matter of getting it documented. I really wanted to actually demo that today, but I was unable to find time because of my technical computer issues. So spending time on support actually ate up time from the demo, unfortunately. But let's move forward on the following slide.
So updates on PnP JS v2. So big push aiming for the release candidate or the beta 1 in October. So did a lot of stuff late into last night on that. Did a lot of code cleanup. And I got to say, thanks again to everybody who's helped out writing all the new tests. I was able to do a lot of pretty big changes and caught some bugs that I myself introduced through all those new tests. So very great to see that work paying off. So thanks everybody again for that. What is left? We have 5 submodules we got to get docs and tests for. I've got some articles left to write on some of the new features to help explain those and how to use them. We've got to fix up the make docs index file. And then I've got some other stuff I probably haven't even thought of yet, but I'm going to create a issue in the issues list. That'll be the beta release punch list. So that way everybody can see that and see that list of stuff. And then, of course, if I've forgotten something, you can always remind me in that issue. So we're getting very close. We will have that out in October. I know we don't have a ton of days left, but we will get a beta out in October. Even if we don't have 100% of the docs and tests done, I think the code is pretty much ready to go. We've got that call recording for Start Contributing. You can check that out. And again, Moving the graph library over as is. We've talked about that before. And did want to say soon we'll be looking for folks once we get the beta out. If folks want to volunteer to help test that stuff and give us feedback, we'll have a little bit more guidance on that process when we get the betas out. But we'll certainly be open to and looking for folks to help us test those out, both on new projects and upgrading your existing projects. So that'll be a big help. And then our next PnP JS V1 release is going to be on November 8th. So we'll have some small updates then, and we'll get that out. Moving forward. Office 365 CLI Beta 2.2.0 is out with support for retrieving Office 365 group activities, removing flows, adding Power Apps, enabling web and site features, retrieving Yammer networks, and retrieving Teams message replies. So as always, you can install the latest beta from @PnP Office 365-CLI at Next. And for those of you that might not be familiar with the CLI, definitely check out the documentation at aka.ms0365CLI that will get you all the details on what is a great cross-platform tool for managing your Office 365, SharePoint, and other workstream tasks. So you can do some administrative stuff, you do some maintenance stuff. It's really great if you need to use it, as part of your development setup. So if you need to set up new sites or new resources, things like that, the CLI is a great way to do that, cross-platform and incorporating lots of great work, as always, from the community on all that stuff. So really excited to see that continue to grow. Next up, reusable SPFx components. For folks that might not be familiar, we have two sets of components. There is the property controls that are designed to work in the edit pane of your web parts. And then we have the controls, or the controls React, as they're named, that are designed to work in the body of your web parts, or just as well could be in an application customizer or other more presentation-focused places. So the latest version of the controls is 1.15, and that includes a file picker, a grid layout, and a carousel, as well as numerous enhancements and fixes to various bugs that have been reported. And we've got a ton of great contributors on this project again as well, some of them listed there. You can find more information at sharepoint.github.io at /spdevfx property controls and spdevfx controls react. For all the documentation and information on there. So again, thanks to all the folks that have contributed on the controls. It's another great tool to have in your toolkit for SPFx development. It can save you a lot of time, and they come styled with the Office UI fabric, so they're going to give you that great out-of-the-box look and blend right into SharePoint, so that you don't have to focus as much on that as you can on composing these controls together to create your solutions. And they can also, of course, be extended. So if you want to take them and extend them, make them a little more customized for your needs, that's, of course, possible as well. And, if you have good ideas for new controls or fixes to existing controls, of course, welcome those contributions as well. And finally, before we get to the demos, we've got the PnP SPFx generator. So this is an open source Yeoman generator built on top of the out-of-the-box standard Microsoft SPFx generator. So under the hood, you're going to get a quote-unquote real SPFx project that has all the same dependencies and core Microsoft libraries inside it. But you can include very easily a lot of additional capabilities that you can't in the out-of-the-box Yeoman generator. So you can choose to include things like PnP JS or jQuery or Office 365 CLI. You could choose different templating packages instead of just React. You could do things like handlebars and Vue, and then as well Angular. So really check that out. Again, another great tool to have in your toolkit. So all of these together really can help speed up your development and help get you started very quickly. The latest version of the generator is 1.10 or 1.10, and you can always read about that at aka.ms PnP generator. We'll get you all the documentation for the generator, and there is installation instructions there, and as well you can chat on Gitter at gitter.im/generator-spfx/generator. One thing about Yeoman, you got to use the word generator a lot. So moving in to our demos. So first up is Ram. If you are ready to go and want to take over the presentation.
Yeah, Patrick, sure.
Great.
Yeah, so for this demo is about an application customizer. So this is an SPFx extension. And if you see, once we add this extension, there is a small icon which comes up here, which allows us to show and hide the header. Right, so when I collapse it, the header gets hidden, and I have more space for the content area where I can read. So basically, the motivation behind developing this is, if we look at the classic sites, we always had this option to focus on content, which hides most of the static ones, and we get more reading area. So that was one of the idea to think of this solution. And there was another scenario where I wanted to use this. So for a developer, like most of the time when we develop the SPFx web parts, we use the developer tools a lot. Like if you see, and we just go through, if we want to check the HTML structure, or we want to see the React components and check the properties and states. This is the most of this time we use this developer tools. And when I want to inspect certain element, like the content area is very small, it's almost not even 20% of the screen. And in such scenarios also, this is helpful, where I can just hide the header and I have more space to check out or debug on the content and the SPFx structure here. So basically, yeah, this is one of the problem which I face, because like many people use multiple monitors. I don't have a multiple monitor system, so, and it's only on one monitor which I work. This could be helpful in such scenarios as well. And there's no other complication. It's a very simple extension. So I'll jump to the code. As you can see, we register the top, the placeholder for the top placeholder, and within this I have written some basic HTML to show two anchor tags using the fabric icons for the expand and collapse icons. And then I've registered the event handlers or the click handlers for these two buttons, and we add a CSS class to the body of the page. And there is the corresponding CSS which hides the header, this part. So basically, we find a div where we have this data automation ID of site header, and we display it. Display none for that site header. So that way we can hide the header, as well as we can also try hiding the swoop bar. So that's all I wanted to share. But before I close, as you can see, this is about playing with the DOM structure, which is definitely not recommended. So I wouldn't suggest this using in a production scenario, but in my case, it's mostly useful as a developer to hide the header and have a more content area on the canvas for troubleshooting and such things. Yeah, Patrick, that's all I wanted to share.
So Patrick, if you don't mind, I'll just jump here on the RAM. So the key reason is actually what Ram said at last, is to have this demo as well. So technically, you can absolutely do this kind of DOM injection implementations using application customizer. It is definitely not also recommended because there's a high risk that whenever we change the page structure, the HTML structure of the page, which is the DOM structure, your extension will not work. So the page HTML on the page should not be considered as an API. Now, to be fair, again, so this is not a black and white discussion, though. You might have a customer who says, okay, fine, I will then move away from the modern. And then we're in an interesting discussion that, well, you probably still want to use modern. So if we need to do a small hack here, is that worthwhile? But that's something which we obviously from a Microsoft side, we can't say that it's a recommended pattern, but we definitely want people to use modern options as well. Using this kind of a DOM manipulation, you can change the page structure quite heavily, definitely, but there are implications. You need to be then taking responsibility of the page. But that's it, just to reiterate on the discussion. So thank you, Ram, on that one.
Yeah, thank you, Visa.
We'll then jump directly on AC's house. AC, are you done, ready for your demo setup?
I am. Let me get my stuff set up here. So you should be able to see the SharePoint docs. What I wanted to talk about in this demo is doing continuous integration and continuous deployment with the SharePoint framework. And I don't have any slides because I'm a developer and we don't use those things. So I'm going to show you a little bit more about how you can automate the entire story of rolling out your SharePoint framework project. And I'm starting from, we want to go from build. If you have tests, you want to be able to leverage tests as well. And then I want to be able to deploy this to multiple, to one or more different environments. Now, everything that I'm going to focus on here is, let me just throw some things out there first. Some of the stuff I'm going to show you is using some preview features from Azure DevOps. They're all available today. You do have to opt into them. I'm using them in production. I've been using them in production for a couple months now. They're very stable. It's one of those things like how Gmail was sitting in beta for 5 years. It didn't really need to be there. I kind of feel the same way about this one feature with Azure Pipelines that I'll talk about. And then another thing I want to mention is that everything that I'm going to show you is really targeted for SharePoint Online. So, and the reason for this is that there is a significant part, the deployment piece to this requires you to use the ALM APIs that shipped and are part of SharePoint Online. They do not exist in SharePoint on-prem, so they're not only like 2/3 of what I'm going to show you today is only available on-prem, and that's just the build and the testing piece of this. The deployment piece is something else you're going to have to do. There's just not an easy automated way to do this. I know people have figured it out and figured different ways to do it. I'm not going to cover that here. That's way beyond the scope. So let me first kind of give you a where are we today and where are we tomorrow. So we're going to spend most of our time tomorrow. For where we are today is that we can do continuous integration and continuous deployment with Azure DevOps. And I have an article from the SharePoint framework documentation about continuous integration and continuous deployment that we already have up on the SharePoint docs. So it's the CI and CD. Now, this is focusing on the present day, let's call it the general availability stuff. And I'll show you where you're gonna be able to tell the difference here. And this is just walks you through how to set everything up using the GUI to create the different tasks or the steps that you want to run, to set everything up, how to go through and set your tests up, how to set up the deployment, all of that stuff. Now, I'm not going to focus on this. This is available today, and we are going to have another article that is going to ship, but we want to wait until like the GA stuff is when the pipelines goes GA. What Microsoft did back at build of 2019 this year is they introduced a new thing, a new kind of refactoring to this stuff called Azure YAML pipelines, and it's part of DevOps. Now, the difference here is that unlike before, where you could define some of your workflow, like your continuous integration piece, you could define it with YAML or through the browser, through the browser-based GUI interface. But your release phase, so once you've built your SharePoint package, your SPFx, to be able to take that package and deploy that to your SharePoint environment, that was all done through a browser-based GUI, and you could export that or import it, but the language that you would be using is all JSON. And there was no real like super automated way to do all of that stuff. It was all still kind of manual, and I find it to be a little flaky. For me, I like to think of when I do Azure DevOps or when I do any kind of DevOps, I like to have everything expressed in code because it allows me to version any of the changes that we have in our rollout. You don't go to a browser-based GUI where you can end up making your changes, and each change, when you go to make a save, it adds another commit and everything. It's just, I think it's very, very messy. Instead, I like to do everything all through, define it all in YAML and all in code. So the new thing that they've done is that we can do everything with these things called YAML pipelines. And what a YAML pipeline is that this is going to allow us to define the entire story from continuous integration to continuous deployment using a YAML file, and we can define it all in one spot. Now, I'm going to show you two ways to do this. I'm going to show you one way to do this, and then I'm going to show you a way to kind of simplify it, make it a little bit easier that I did. So let's first take a look at what this looks like, at what one of these YAML files looks like. So if you come over here and you take a look at this file, and there's going to be, I think David Warner's dropping a couple of links. I gave him a preview of the links that I'm doing today. So he's dropping some links as I go in here and going through some stuff on in the demo. There we go. There's the gist right there. So let me kind of explain what's going on in this. This pipeline is doing 4 things. It is going to build my project at the exact same time. It is also going to run all of my tests. And if both of those stages pass successfully and there's no errors, then it will then deploy my project to my developer environment, and it will also deploy it to my production environment. Now, you may wonder, like, well, why do you want to do it to both? We'll talk about that stuff in a little bit. So here, what is this doing? I'm going to walk through each one of these pieces here, and you may be it gets a little intimidating, but it's actually really slick. So here, this first part, lines 1 through 4, this trigger part, what this says is I always want this pipeline to run all the time, every branch that gets pushed. In this case, you may want this to only run at specific times. So like, for example, like I have a job, I have a separate Azure pipeline that I run for one of my sites, and it runs whenever I do a push to master, but then it also has a cron job that says, go run this at 4 or 5 specific times throughout the day. And because I just want these bills, I need these bills to happen at specific times. Forget about the reason why, but just know that there's other options there. This variable section right here, you'll see these used throughout the throughout this YAML pipeline. But basically what this does is inside of Azure DevOps, you can create this thing called a library or a variable group. And what that is going to do is it allows you to have name value pairs where you can go put the dynamic stuff in there. So this would be a great place to put things like usernames and passwords and all of that stuff inside of this. Gary, I'm not sure what you mean by the type of host. I don't know if you mean the agent. Just clarify your question, and I'm happy to answer that. Oh yeah, so Gary, yeah. So in this case here, so Gary's asking in there about the. I'm gonna change his question. I'm gonna be a politician, change his question because I can do the answer a little bit better that way. So what Gary is asking is, when you run this stuff in Azure pipelines, you have the option to run your jobs either on Windows, on Linux, or on Mac OS, or on your own environment, like a container or something like that. You can define what you want to use. I've simplified this one a little bit. I've pulled out the part where you can say what agent you want to use. I do all my builds on Linux. It's much faster than doing it on Windows. But that doesn't mean that Windows is bad or Linux is good or anything like that. You can totally set that. There's a whole option. There's a setting in there within the pipeline where you can set that, and you'll see that in a few minutes. But yes, you can. You have full control over that. Anyway, these groups are also good because one of the other things that you can do is you can also change. So Lou, the question there about the cron, the cron configuration, that's the same for Windows and Linux. Cron is just the standard. That's just an industry term that you're configuring Azure DevOps to run these jobs at specific times. So that has nothing to do with the difference here. All right. One of the nice things, going back to these variable groups, one of the nice things about these is that you can put in things that need to be secured. So like, for example, I have my username and password that I want to use for my deployments in my Office or my SharePoint Online environment. I have those inside of those credentials, and you can encrypt the password so that they're not going to show up. All right. So they won't be readable. And you can also map those things to an Azure Key Vault as well if you wanted to. All right, so let's get into the work here. So the way that this all is done is we have these concepts of stages, all right? So a stage is just a grouping of a bunch of jobs, and all of the jobs have to succeed for that stage to be successful. Now, in this case here, it's kind of simple. I only have one job really for each one of these, for each one of my stages. But here what this is doing is it says this stage is called build, and let's just ignore what depends on for right now. That just means this doesn't depend on anything, which means it's going to run every time. I give the job a name. Think of this as like its internal ID. It's got to be alphanumeric. Actually, I don't even know if it can be numeric. It's got to be alpha, and it's got to no spaces. And then display name, well, that's kind of obvious. Now, what happens when a project is built? You guys are going to recognize this as being SharePoint framework developers. The first thing we have to do, well, what's going to happen by default without us doing anything is it's going to do a git clone and pull down our entire project. Now, we can have these pipelines set up for projects hosted in Git or GitHub. We can have them hosted inside of Azure DevOps. Doesn't matter. It can be anywhere. In fact, I'll show you one in a minute that's hosted in GitHub, but the pipeline runs inside of Azure DevOps. But you can just think of when you do one of these jobs, when you see job like this right here, it's going to do a checkout, and you can control that if you want. Again, talk about that later. So here, first thing we have to do, we got to get all the dependencies. So I'm going to do an npm install, download everything. The next thing I'm going to do, I need to execute the build. So I'm going to run the gulp task, and I'm going to say I want it to run a target of build. Now that target, that's like the the name of the task you want to run. Now, there you see where I'm using the task gulp at 0. So some of you may look at that and say, well, that looks a little weird. That is the beta version or the preview version of the gulp task. The GA version, which apparently wasn't really GA, gulp at 1, had a bug in it. And I found it's kind of cool when you find a bug in something production and you convince Microsoft that it is a bug and they fixed it. The fix is still rolling out, and so I've cut a few things out here. You're going to see where those things were in a few minutes. But effectively, well, I'll explain why in a little bit. You'll understand why. But yeah, I had to explicitly specify where the gulp file.js file was, and when you did it with the at 1, and you may be wondering like, well, I didn't have to do that. Well, again, just hold your horses. I'll come back to that. Second step. We want to run gulp bundle ship. How do you do that? You say run the gulp task. The task is bundle and the gulp is ship. So you notice here you get these different tasks of these things ahead of time. Yes, horses. There goes Chris wakes up. GA stands for general availability. In other words, it's production. It's released. When you see these tasks, these are things that have been defined ahead of time by the Azure DevOps guys. By the Azure DevOps team. You can also create your own custom things, as I'll do in just a minute. So the last one we had to do, we got to package the solution, generate the SPPKG. So I say, hey, go ahead and build this guy up. Now's where it gets kind of interesting. Now this piece here, no, Ralph, you don't have to. I just do it to be explicit. Now this next piece right here is you want to publish, I want to save this SPPKG file. Okay, so I just skipped this step right here. And let me explain, let me come back to this in just a minute. Let me explain what's going on here. So this piece right here about publishing the artifact, what I need to do now that I've built this SPPKG file, it's on the virtual machine or on the agent where my build is happening. I need to take that file and put it somewhere shared so other stages in my pipeline will have access to it. And that's called publishing an artifact. So I'm effectively upload this file to a shared folder. Think about it like that, okay? So I'm saying, go publish an artifact. What artifact? I'm using these variables that we get inside of Azure DevOps. And I'm saying, go look inside the current local path, look in these /SharePoint/solution. You guys are familiar with that. And grab this file, right? And I want you to publish that as an artifact named SPFx package. Now, you're like, well, wait a minute, where's this coming from? This is coming from this step right here. You have to know when you publish a file, or when even when you upload it to SharePoint Online, to an app catalog, or when you go to install it, you have to know the exact file name, and that can be a pain because every project is going to have a different file name. And so what I did here is I created this little bash script, and what this does is it's running a bash command. Now this works on Linux. If you're doing it on Windows, you're going to have to write a separate command for this. But in this one here, what it's doing is I'm creating this method here. Think of it like a function that's going to run the find something. I'm looking for a file named this, and then I want to get just the base name out of it. So it would be, if my file was hello world.sppkg, then the result of this entire run is hello world. Then down here on this echo statement, what I'm doing is when you use a syntax that looks like this, what it's doing is it's telling, it's going to run something on the command line on the agent, but it's going to get sucked out of the command line into a variable. So I'm saying, create a variable for this task named SPPKG file name, and I want it to be an output variable. Go run this command and stuff the value of this command or the result of it inside that variable, so that I have this thing called get SharePoint package with this variable name. Ta-da, that's where I'm getting the name right there. Make sense? So it makes things a little kind of cool. Okay, well, that's builds running off on the side. I want to test my stuff. So same deal. I've got a bunch of unit tests that have been set up here. So how am I going to do this? Well, again, this is a totally separate thing that's running on a totally different virtual machine or on a totally separate instance. So I need to do everything again. I need to go do an install. I need to do a build, and then I need to run all my tests. In this case here, this was an update that was provided here from somebody in the community. If you have any failures in your test, it's a good idea to say continue on error is true, so that you can still publish your code coverage results and your test results, but if there was a failure in the test, I'll fail it when I actually go after I publish the test results. So this is a cool little trick so that you still get all the reporting stuff that you want. Code coverage is just going to show you like what lines of code have been covered. You know, that's all unit testing stuff. We won't dive into that kind of detail right now. All right, so now we've got our build has run and our test has run, and we have an artifact, a couple artifacts that have been generated. We've got our SPPKG file that's been generated. We've got our test results that have been generated, and we got our code coverage report that's been generated. They've all been published to our pipeline. Now the next step is going to be deployment, and I'm doing 2 deployments here. The first one's going to deploy to a dev environment. The second one's going to deploy to a production environment. So the exact same thing. I'm just going to look at the production environment right now. So here, this is a little bit different. This is a little bit different. So see, this depends on. This says only run this. Somebody's not on mute. If you wouldn't mind, please mute yourself. So this depends on. What this is saying is there are 2 other stages named build and test. Remember, we have one up here called test, and we have one up here called build. This says down here, only proceed. Where's my deployment? Here it is. This says only proceed with this stage if those 2 things passed. So my build and test are going to run in parallel, and if either one of them fail, no deployment happens. You got a red build, and that's where we go find somebody, find the developer, gather around his desk, and start yelling out shame, shame, shame. Now, this job, if you notice from the builds, is a little bit different because he's no longer a job, he's a deployment. This is a special kind of a job. This is different in YAML pipelines than what we had in the traditional pipelines, because this is indicating that something is going to be shipped. This is kind of like the replacement for the release stuff that we used to do. So deployment, there you go. A display name, going to give it a friendly name, and the environment is something that I can go back and look and see, hey, this environment, let me see all the times I've deployed to this, and I can roll back to the thing that was deployed to it. All this strategy, run once, deploy steps, don't worry about what the other options are there. That's all you got right now is the run once strategy. They are adding additional ones, like if you guys are familiar with green, blue, there'll be stuff like that. All right, next up, I want to do my deployment. Well, how do I do my deployment? Well, yours truly isn't a fan of PowerShell, so we're going to go with the Office 365 CLI. And so what I have to do is that it's probably likely that my agent, or that the Office 365 CLI doesn't exist on the hosted agent. We only need it in a SharePoint Online space. So I'm going to first install the Office 365 CLI. See, Ralph's got a question here. To make things run in parallel means having their own agent in parlance of agents having multiple agents. So having things run in parallel is when you have 2 stages. You'll see that. So right now I have 4 stages total. I would have to have. We'll talk. I can talk about licensing at the end if there's time. I really don't want to though because I'm a developer and I don't like that stuff. But you get one. Everybody, if you have Azure DevOps, you get 1 agent. You can buy more agents that can run in parallel. But in this case here, my build would run and my test would run, but they won't run in parallel because I only have 1 agent. Those are 2 separate stages. My deployments, each one of those is going to run separately as well. If I had 2 agents, 2 hosted agents, or if I had, like, say, multiple containers that I'd set up and did what are called self-hosted agents, and there's a cost associated with that, then I could have multiple things and run them in parallel. So if you need to speed things up, you got to fork over a couple bucks. It's not expensive though. I'll talk about that at the end if we have time, but I probably won't. Okay, so I've installed the CLI and now I need to log into the CLI. And so I'm going to do that by saying O365 login, pass in the URL of where I want to go, and then I'm going to type in, say I want to do a password login, and then I'm using different things here. So see where I'm passing in the user login and the user admin password. I cut some stuff out there. So that, sorry, these are variables coming from that variable group that I defined at the top. Okay, so I've logged in. Then I need to go download the pipeline artifact. I need to go download that SPPKG file. I got to download that guy into this deployment stage. Now I have a local copy of it. What am I downloading? The thing that was named SPFx package. Well, that's not really the name. Remember, it's like Hello World SPPKG. So I got to get the name of it again. So I grab the name of it, and then it's just standard deployment. O365 SharePoint Online, add an app. Where's the file? It's right here. Where's it going? There's the URL. This is a site collection scoped app catalog. I'm going to overwrite anything that's currently there and then say I'll skip deployment. Next step, I'm going to do the deployment phase. Ta-da. Okay. And then production's the exact same thing, just going to a separate URL. And you're like, why are you doing it twice? Again, we'll talk about it later. What does it look like? Here's what it looks like. Check this out. So this is one that has been run. We got our 3 different agents that run. So this is an entire pipeline. So if I go to my Azure DevOps for pipelines, so I have one pipeline that's set up. Now for you to be able to get these pipelines that are shown up here, you're gonna have to come over here into your Azure DevOps. It might not look this good. I'm a joke, that's a joke. You're gonna come over here to preview features, and you have to make sure that this guy is enabled, multi-stage pipelines. This is what gives you're opting into the preview features of Azure DevOps to do YAML pipelines. Once you do that, then you see pipelines show up here on the left. So I added a new pipeline, and then it'll ask you, where do you want the pipeline to be? So I have it inside of, in this case, it's a GitHub repo. So I'd say GitHub repo, and then it's going to ask me what repo you want to have access to and all that. So which of the different projects you have access to do you want to use? And then you end up picking the file Azure-pipelines.yaml. All right, let's go back to this though. Pipelines. All right, here we go. So here's one that's run. So this is one instance that's run for this guy, okay? Ignore the fact that it broke a couple times. So if I click into this guy, what do we see? Well, here are our stages. There's my build stage and there's my test stage. And notice that both of these guys passed and then they went into the deployments. Can you change variable groups per environment? Yes, and actually, Nick, I'm gonna show you how I do that in just a minute because this is gonna get a lot easier in just a minute. So here we can even see all the details of it. You can see what artifacts were published. Well, I can see there's my SPPKG file that was published, and there it is, my Apollo Viewer React. Does the YAML file have to be created manually? Yes, but I'm going to show you how that's easier in just a second too. Here's my test. Remember I published my test results? Sweet, no test failures, right? So I got all my tests got published up here because I published the test results. What about my code coverage results? Same deal. I published the report, so I can even dig in and see all the results from my code coverage, my testing. What about my environments? I can see what got deployed to the development environment. I can see when things got deployed, what the last thing was that was deployed here. Now, back up a bit, check out one of these jobs so you can see some of the details with this. So here's what this guy looked like. So this one took about 1 minute and 50 seconds. You can see here, it first went through, it checked everything out, and then installed everything. So we can see the details of what ran. So it ran npm install. Next step, ignore these guys. They didn't run. You can see how they're not filled in. SharePoint framework build. So there we go. Recognize all that stuff. Looks like a SharePoint framework build to me. You guys have seen this before. Now here's where it gets kind of cool though. So remember I said that we've got a deploy to development and I have a deploy to production. So check this out. Their environments. So I had my production environment. Here's why I have 2 separate environments and I'm deploying to both of them, because I always want dev to be having the latest and greatest stuff, but with production, I don't ever want it to manually go out. I want to have a check here. I want to put a manual approval check that's going to force myself to say, you need to manually okay this. And what will happen is this deployment to production will get to this point and it will stop and it will send me an email and say, you need to come in here and approve this. And so when I go into it, I click on the link and I come to Azure DevOps, or I hook up the whole team integration to it. I click approve and then it will flow. So you can have eyes on. Okay, pretty cool. All this stuff works, right? And then you can see here, I'm able to see, let's see all these pipelines. I'm able to see like all the stages that succeeded, and when things were actually running, I would see things running as well. Okay, now it's all really cool here, but this can be a little challenging to write one of these really big files. So I did something to make your life a little bit easier. So I created this project called Azure Pipelines SPFx templates. I created these templates, and what these templates are they're separate templates for each one of the different stages, like the build stage or the deploy stage. So I think somebody had a question earlier, which was, well, can I have different like environment variables set for these different things? All that stuff that I showed you a second ago, it looks pretty much the same, except wouldn't it be nice if I could swap out the URL or swap out the usernames? You totally can do that. The way you do that is up here is I've created this template and I've specified all these parameters that have to be passed in. Notice here, I have a default where we're using Ubuntu, but you can change and use a different agent if you wanted to, like if you wanted to use Windows. So I've got these parameters set up for these jobs. So you're wondering, okay, cool. How does it look to actually use this? Well, in this project, if you come over here to the sample, first of all, the help tells you everything on how to do this. In the sample project, there is a SharePoint framework project here that if you click on Azure Pipelines, this YAML file, you'll see one new thing listed right here, right after the trigger, before you get to the variables. I'm pointing to a GitHub repository. I'm giving it a specific name. It's a GitHub name, and I had to create an endpoint for this. So the endpoint is what's called a service connection. So in my project in Azure DevOps, if you come over here to your project settings, you'll have this thing called service connections, where you have to define a service connection that effectively says, this is how I'm connecting to GitHub, and here are my credentials and how you're going to connect to it. So I set the credentials up and everything. It's separate from the pipeline itself. So once I've set that up and I gave it a name of Voitanos GitHub, I'm saying you're going to use Voitanos GitHub and you're going to connect to this GitHub repo, and this is the repository that you want to get. What that does is that's going to suck in it's going to clone the repo so that now when I get into my build stage, it's then I can then say, instead of specifying out the whole job, I can just say use the template jobs, and then I want to change the parameters. Or like in my deployment job, I'm going to change the parameters to use this name, this username and password, this URL, my dev environment, site collection, anything else I want to do on the top end. And then same thing, I'll do the same thing for production and list that out all right here. So now that entire file that I showed you a minute ago, if you like the template of all the stuff it's got in it, you can do the exact same thing here by specifying using the same setup. Okay. Makes your life a heck of a lot easier. There's also a way that is defined in the README for this that allows you to say, if I only want like the version 1 of these templates, and you don't want to be like, if we make an update to it and we add some new features and change functionality, you may not want your build pipeline to change without notice. So you may want to pin your stuff to the specific thing. And so we tag stuff. You can pin to a specific branch. You can pin to a specific tag. It's all listed there. Okay. And it documents everything you need to do on how you set this up and all the explanation of this stuff. And if you need any more explanation of this stuff, I'll wrap up with this. I have a blog post that explains this whole thing on how to automate and everything, all this stuff, and using those templates if you want. Okay. And so with that, I think there might have been a question or two that came up that I might have missed. So that's everything that I wanted to show. Vesa, and I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody had any questions to this. I believe this should technically work on-prem as well. Jag, I said this earlier, some of it does. It will work on the build and the test stuff should work. Well, your mileage may vary. The deployment stuff absolutely won't work because deployment requires the ALM REST APIs to be able to deploy stuff. So, and that's not on-prem, that's only in SharePoint Online. Second of all, this whole thing with YAML pipelines is a preview feature for Azure DevOps in the cloud version, not for the on-prem version. So what I showed, so some of the stuff that I showed, yes, you could do it on-prem, but I have no idea what the state of whatever they call it, DevOps on-prem or VSTS on-prem or whatever that is. I don't know what the story is there for this. You can deploy to 2019 using PnP PowerShell. The APIs are in 2019. Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, so Azure DevOps Server. Thanks, Vincent. So, I mean, then yeah, you could change this setup here, and if you could do if there's a way to be able to deploy programmatically, then yeah, you can do anything. You can deploy to anything that you want as long as it's scriptable, and that's the biggest hang up that we've had for the longest time. I didn't know that 2019 had the ALM APIs. Thanks for that, Gary. Let's see. Is there a charge for Azure DevOps? So good question, Russell. So the way it works is that if you have, now let's just talk about the hosted version. I'm not going to even try to broach the topic on-prem. For the hosted version, you get one agent for free. Let's see if I can pop this up in my account. So where's my agent pools? Okay, so you get one agent for free. Okay, and that one agent can be a Windows VM or a Linux VM or whatever. They have a template of the different VMs that are available. Okay, So agents. No, that's not what I wanted to show you. Where is it? Let's do, it's in my settings. Oh, wait, pool, no, agent pools. I forgot what this was. Adding a pool, settings. I forget. So if you have a MSDN subscription, you do have Azure DevOps with your account, and you get one hosted agent. So that's like a virtual machine. If you needed, and it comes with, I believe, 30 hours of runtime per month. If you want to go, if you want to add additional minutes, like if you run out, or if you want to add additional agents so that you can run parallel jobs, then that is $40 per agent per month for hosted agent per month. Another option, like I use this company here. Where is it? Volter. So I use this company to set up, to create a virtual machine. It's super cheap. They're dirt cheap VMs. And then I created, I guess you can, I'll show you this too if you want to, if you want to explore. This is very much use at your own risk. This is under my GitHub, I think. I created a container that uses, where is it? Agent. There. I created an Azure Pipelines Linux agent, and this is a Docker container. And I created a virtual machine that was like $20 a month, and I put two of these containers instances on that agent. And what they do is they connect to Azure DevOps. And as an MSDN subscriber, you get 2 of your own user-hosted agents that you can use. So I was using those. I found I use those for some stuff. I don't use it for other things because they just run into some performance things. But you can do that. If you want to do that with containers, you can definitely do that as well. And so I was doing that to not have to spend another $40. Instead, I was effectively spending $20 a month and getting 2 agents to get the parallelism out of it instead of having to spend 40. If you can add additional user-hosted agents at a tune of $15 per month, you have to pay for the actual the whatever's going to host the agent itself. So if you create like Azure VMs, each one of those VMs is going to cost you whatever the consumption is for those, and then you have to pay the $15 tax to hook it up to Azure DevOps. That's what you saw when I went over to these pools here, and you saw a list of all of these agents that were dead. These were old containers that I wasn't using anymore, and I just recently killed these guys as well. But these are different Docker containers that are running in that Volter VM. Russell says, asking about a macOS agent, can we build iPhone apps on Azure? Absolutely, because that is a macOS agent. You can totally do that. And I think that's all the questions. I don't think I missed any of the questions. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, I think this is a good place to jump back to the slides. So we'll do that, and folks will let me know when they can see those, of course. But want to thank everybody for joining the call today. Want to, of course, thank Ram and Andrew for the awesome demos. Great stuff from both of you. So I really appreciate that. And if I can go to the next slide, the next SharePoint Development Special Interest Group, which would be next Thursday, is canceled. And this is because Ignite. We got all the folks are at Ignite. Imagine many of you will be at Ignite. And it's just easier for everybody to just kind of cancel for next week. So sorry about that. You'll miss 1 week of us, but we'll be back on November 7th with another SharePoint Framework and JavaScript Special Interest Group on November 7th, and the General Dev SIG will pick back up, as you might expect, on November 14th. So if those of you who are traveling to Ignite, have safe travels and have a lot of fun there, and look forward to, well, I won't be there, but so I don't look forward to seeing you, but I look forward to hearing all about it, and I hope everybody has a great time. I know there's a lot of really awesome announcements and some great sessions there. So do please have some fun and safe travels, and thank you all for joining the call this week, and we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.